Thanks for watching this video from Answering Calvinism. My name is Alex Polyak. I am the founder of Answering Calvinism. And today I'm going to be talking about Paul's conversion experience on the road to Damascus. Many Calvinists point to Paul's conversion experience to support their doctrine of irresistible grace. By the way, if you don't know what irresistible grace is, irresistible grace is a Calvinist doctrine that asserts that God's calling is irresistible. In other words, once God calls somebody to be a Christian, the person cannot resist. That person will choose to become a Christian, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. God's calling is irresistible, according to Calvinists. By the way, irresistible grace is the I in the Calvinist TULIP acronym. So, one way Calvinists try to prove irresistible grace is by pointing to Paul's conversion experience on the road to Damascus. So does this really support the Calvinist doctrine? I don't think so, and that's what I'm going to show in this video. Okay, so let me start by giving a summary of what happened to Paul on the road to Damascus. This event is recorded in Acts chapter 9, and actually Paul went by the name Saul at this time. And at this time period, Saul was hell-bent on trying to stamp out the Christian movement. Paul had just obtained letters from the high priest of Jerusalem, giving him the authority to arrest Christians. You can read this in Acts 9, verse 1 to 2. And Saul was en route to Damascus to arrest Christians. Suddenly a bright light shined, and Saul fell to the ground. Then Jesus asked, "Why are you persecuting me?" This is Acts 9, verse 3 to 4. Then Saul said, "Who are you, Lord?" And then Jesus answered, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads." This is Acts 9, verse 5. Then Paul is described as trembling and astonished. And then he asks Jesus, "What do you want me to do?" This is Acts 9, verse 6. Then Jesus replies, "Arise and go to the city, and you will be told what you must do." Saul then went to Damascus. He got baptized, and he immediately began preaching Christ in the synagogues. So Calvinists assert that this conversion experience confirms their doctrine of irresistible grace. Calvinists claim that Paul could not have resisted Jesus. Are they right? Well, not according to Paul. When Paul was recounting his conversion experience to King Agrippa in Acts 26, Paul specifically said in Acts 26, verse 19, quote, "I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision," which implies he could have been disobedient. I mean, to suggest otherwise makes no sense. Nobody would make such a statement if it was not possible. If I said I did not fly my plane to work today, I would be implicitly saying that I had a plane. It's the same with Paul saying, "I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision." By Paul saying that, Paul was implicitly saying he could have been disobedient. So Paul's own words show that Paul could have resisted God's calling. So this passage in no way proves irresistible grace. Now, whenever Calvinists are confronted with this fact, they often respond sarcastically. Calvinist James White, for example, said in a debate with Steve Gregg about this topic, after Steve Gregg mentioned that Paul could have disobeyed, James White sarcastically said, "Imagine if Paul would have said no. What is God going to do now? He has all these plans. He has all these people he wants to save. He has all these churches he wants to found. What is God going to do now?" Now, of course, he said this sarcastically. Another one of my Calvinist friends, when I recently talked to him about this passage, he said, "Man, God really got lucky that Paul didn't say no, or we'd have no Bible." So these kinds of sarcastic comments are common whenever, Calvinists are confronted with the fact that Paul said he could have disobeyed. And these kind of comments are really so silly that they're almost not worth responding to. However, because Calvinists make them so often, I will take the time to do so. First, had Paul said no to Jesus, Jesus could have easily gotten someone else. It wasn't like Paul, a mere man, could thwart God's grand plans by saying no. Had Paul said no, Jesus could have easily gotten somebody else. It's really just that simple. Secondly, and even more importantly, Jesus didn't just pick Paul randomly. Jesus obviously knew that the reason Paul opposed him was because Paul did not think that Jesus was on God's side. Paul was not persecuting Christians because he was anti-God. Rather, Paul was persecuting Christians because he thought Jesus was anti-God. So Paul thought that he was doing, God's will by persecuting Christians. In fact, after Paul's conversion, Paul specifically said that he persecuted Christians, quote, in ignorance. You can read this in 1 Timothy 1, verse 13. In other words, Paul didn't know he was opposing God. He did it in ignorance. The reason Paul persecuted Christians is because Paul wrongly thought Christians were anti-God. But once Paul figured out that Jesus was on God's side during his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, then Paul quickly joined the Christian movement. Not because he was forced to by some irresistible calling or, irresistible force or whatever, but because Paul genuinely wanted to serve God. And we know Paul genuinely wanted to serve God because of Paul's own description of himself. In Philippians 3, verse 4 to 6, Paul said he was circumcised on the 8th day. He said he was from the tribe of Benjamin. He called himself a Hebrew of Hebrews. He said he was a Pharisee, and he even called himself blameless regarding the law. In other words, Paul did what the law said. He called himself blameless. He obeyed the law. So Paul was not an enemy of God. But he wrongly thought that Jesus was an enemy of God, which is why he was persecuting Christians. But once Paul figured out that Jesus was on God's side, on the road to Damascus, then he quickly repented and became a Christian. So Paul's conversion experience in no way supports the Calvinist doctrine of irresistible grace. Paul's own words entirely refute the Calvinist view. Okay, so that is it for today. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do me a huge favor, hit the like button. Also, if you want to be notified of new videos, hit the subscribe button. And for more information about the topics discussed in this video, you can visit my website, answeringcalvinism.org. There's a bunch of free articles and videos there. Again, the website address is answeringcalvinism.org. Okay, so thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.